Welcome to another chapter in the podcast for non-interpretive skills. My name is Nadia Kedem. I'm a neuroradiologist, and today we're going to talk about core concept of imaging informatics. I have no clue what I'm talking about, so I need an expert, and I have Elias Kikano with me today. Elias, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Naja. Thanks for having me. So I'm Elias Kikano. I'm a radiologist. I specialize in abdominal imaging, but I'm also the medical director of imaging informatics at our academic institution. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm personally so grateful that we have folks like you everywhere in our system where we work, because I am always unable to express my grievances with the IT people. They don't understand what I'm talking about, but you know what terminology to use. And it's very much about the terminology. So a lot of things that are needed for the ABR exam, for example, is just knowing what these abbreviations mean and what it all is. So let's just dive in. There are some imaging standards, and most people probably have heard the term DICOM, but can you talk a little bit about DICOM standards?
Yeah, of course. So DICOM stands for the Digital Imaging and Communications in Medicine, and that's a standard that's set internationally. It talks about and specifies protocols for display, transfer, storage, and processing of medical images. There's pixel-based imaging data, and there's also a lot of metadata that is attached to this. The image that you see as a radiologist, that's only one component of it. There's a lot of other metadata that is attached and standardized on these files. So things like the scanner information, the date and time, patient information, name, date of birth, those all get attached to the actual images as the metadata and gets transmitted across the system. And again, because it's in a standardized format, no matter what software platform you're using, whatever manufacturer makes the scanner, and whatever sits in between knows where to look for those specific fields and transmit that information.
Sorry to interrupt. We do
Yeah,
know as radiologists, when we're looking for patients' imaging study, we can use the medical record number or the accession number. And those are all linked with the medical record and the reporting system. So those are the kinds of data that are exchanged with different systems, right?
exactly. That's all embedded and follows the patient everywhere, including in those DICOM files, as we said. So you have things that sit in between. You have the modality, that's the actual scanners, CT, MRI, ultrasound, X-ray machines. All of those are one place to find this. You have a radiology information system that sits in between everything and transmits and is the air traffic control for everything coming through, whether from a scanner, it goes through that radiology information system or the RIS that gets sent to another software for image viewing and processing and archiving and storage. It also directs it to your dictation software, and all of that gets orchestrated to do your whole workflow as a radiologist and for clinical providers to see the images too.
And this radiology information system that could be part of the electronic health record.
Yeah, that's correct. So some places the radiology information system or the RIS could be one and the same as a module of their electronic health record software. Some places may also have a radiology information system that's a standalone software from another vendor, or it could be from some of the vendors who make the modalities, the actual CT and MRI scanners and others. They also make a software that does radiology information system. So it can get as simple and as complicated as you want.
The other term that comes up that I've heard is very abstract is HL7. What the heck is that?
Yeah. So HL7 is another international standard, and that's also for what messages get sent back and forth. It talks about the exchange, integration, and sharing of general medical information that's the non-imaging data. So we said DICOM is for imaging data. HL7 is more generic, and it's for all interoperability and exchange of medical information. We're typically on the V2 standard is the one that's most widely adopted in most systems. And that's what happens where you send those HL7 messages. They're in that V2 format. That's what gets sent between electronic health record to other software to say things like the patient has arrived, the patient is admitted, the patient has changed of status. You can think of it like an email message that's going out every single time that there's a change in one piece of software to communicate that to the others.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I was told there is an even better application that is called FHIR, FHIR. It stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. And the way that I heard about it is I asked In our dictation system, I can attach an image with an annotated finding into my report. But then when it goes to the health record system, it's no longer visible. And I was told because we don't have this advanced system to exchange those data, it doesn't send that image over with the report text. Is that kind of, yeah,
Yeah, no, that's
okay.
definitely part of it. You're right. So, like I said, HL7 V2 is the most widely adopted. In between that, they made a version 3, which is a little bit more like human readable, and but it has increased complexity, and so that hasn't been as widely adopted. The step up from all of those beyond HL7 is this FHIR, the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource that you mentioned. And this is a newer standard that is coming online for a lot of different software platforms, but it allows for some of that bidirectional and multimedia exchange that can happen. It's nicer because you can set up that connection once, and as long as the items are supported on both ends, then there's bidirectional exchange of information. Whereas HL7 messaging requires one software to send that message, and then the other has to accept and receive it and process that information. So it's one-way traffic each way. FHIR allows for that bidirectional exchange in an automatic fashion. So if something changes one place, it automatically changes in the other. They're talking to each other constantly.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I can't wait to get that. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, which in the syllabus for the ABR exam is listed in this chapter, and it's about the ontology, specifically the RADLEX. And I've never really understood what this is or what we do about it and how it relates to the IT world. Do you know anything about this RADLEX?
Yeah, a little bit. So ontologies is a more general term for formal collections of terms and their inherited or causal relationships. Radlex is a subset of that, and it's one of the largest collections for radiology specific lexicon. I know it has over 60 to 70,000 different terms that are for anatomy, procedures, pathology. And there's another subset of that for like digital imaging exams and names. So this is just trying to set a standard of, I call something a CT, abdomen and pelvis. What are the correct terms to spell all that out, and how is that identified? So that everyone has a gold standard or reference to go to. One thing that's nice is that the Radlex collection has merged with a broader international standard collection called LOINC, which stands for Logical Observation Identifiers, Names, and Codes. This is another international standard that has nomenclature for all of medicine in general. So if we call a lab test some abbreviation here, it's the same and matches the same LOINC code as another institution. This allows, again, more way to standardize what we're doing and use the same playbook, and but also increases interoperability and exchange.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I guess I can forget about this right away. But those who have exams coming up, they might need to remember. Then we move on to the reading room environment. So there we deal with a PAC system, and there's also another version for image archiving, which is the VNA. Can you talk about these two a little bit?
Yeah, these are starting to get into your core applications that you use. Everyone knows PACS, but that's an acronym. It stands for Picture Archiving and Communication System. Again, that's your primary tool for viewing your images, doing your interpretations, adding measurements, doing all the stuff that you use on a daily basis. This can run on any type of computer machine, but you usually have a dedicated workstation, a dedicated diagnostic quality display. There's some short storage on there, and they may be linked to a bigger archive system as well. So whatever software you use for your packs that's bringing in your images, it can have certain things built into it, like your work lists and other things, or it can be just purely for image viewing. It's going to get information from that RIS system that we talked about earlier, and it's going to receive data as a DICOM to view that. There's a lot of different ways these can run locally, and there's newer solutions that run on like thinner clients, some run in the cloud now, so that to offload the computing power that was once needed on a local station, it can be done more remotely. Separately, you have a VNA acronym that stands for a vendor neutral archive. So your DICOM images, they may come to your workstation locally temporarily, but eventually you want to keep those for long-term storage for priors for patients or for historical data. VNA allows for that to happen. It's vendor neutral, meaning it doesn't matter who manufactures it or who manufactures the modalities. but it also allows for DICOM as well as non-DICOM data. So it primarily fills with radiology stuff, but it could come from cardiology images, operating room procedure images, point of care ultrasound, stat visible light images from photography of wound care, pathology slides, ophthalmology images. All these sorts of stuff can be stored in a vendor neutral archive and crosses into things like enterprise imaging, which encompasses all of imaging throughout an entire healthcare institution, not just radiology. Lots of advantages for that. Helps keep the IT systems organized and have one point of contact and place for storing all the medical images and organizing them for patients.
And then there is something about image displays, which is very technical, and I don't usually think about it, but I do care about the lighting in the reading room. I notice that people have very different preferences. Some people like to sit completely in the dark, other people have the lights on. I think the reading room, the recommended lighting is 25 to 50 lux. And I looked that up. So 50 lux is about what you would have in your family living room. So when you're watching TV, you dim the lights, you want to see where your drink is and the remote, right? But you also
Yes.
see the TV really well. So that's the ideal lighting, 25 to 50 lux. There's also something for the monitor resolution or luminance, which I just trust that the monitors that we use have that. It should be
Yeah.
at minimum 350, what is that, CD over square meter? What is CD?
That's for candlescence, I believe.
Oh, okay.
They'll have to double check for me on that,
And
but
then a little bit
um,
higher, 420 for
candlescence, yeah.
MO interpretation. The televisions on the market for flat screen in 2017 had 400 of these, whatever, it per square meter. So I think our monitors definitely meet that as a minimum requirement. So it's 350 for diagnostic, 420 for MO. It might come up on the exam. And I wanted to ask you about image compression, because when we don't look at a study, it gets archived and I assume it gets compressed. Sometimes in the past, we have compressed imaging to burn them on a CD. And there's a difference between non-lossy compression and lossy compression. Do you know if we're still using either of those two and how?
Yeah, we use them in different scenarios. It depends on what the standards are. The institutions can set different criteria. The main thing is that storage, unfortunately, costs money. And so the more and more you store, while you want to have as many priors as possible, and you need to follow some regulations at state and federal levels around how long a healthcare institution is required to keep data on file, it's always a consideration, right? Because we end up paying for that storage, whether that's with on-premise hardware, but now with the cloud as well, does all of that costs money. Always we're looking for ways that we can minimize that cost while maintaining the data and the integrity of it too. Compression is a main tool that you use for that. So you have, as you mentioned, lossless compression. So lossless compression, you decrease the extra information that's on the image and you can cut down the storage. So, there's black areas around what's being scanned. There's extra series that might come across, things like that. Anything you can do to minimize the storage while retaining the full quality of the image, that would fall under lossless compression. You keep all the content and just reduce the size by an amount. You can have lossy compression that lets you get even more substantial gains on your storage size. You're going to get rid of things permanently, essentially. You're going through certain compression algorithms, and there's data that you definitely won't need even years down the road, or things that are redundant, things that don't meet the federal guidelines after a certain X number of years, and you have a policy in place. Lossy compression might be useful so that you can still keep some of that data there, but cut down on your storage costs even more.
Perfect. And then another thing to talk about in the reading room that's not really technology, but it's still something that's important to know is ergonomics. So I like to know how you do this. So I've taught our residents before. I usually start with my chair. So what I do is I plant my feet on the floor and I make sure the seat height is set so that I have a 90-degree angle at the knee between the lower leg and the thigh. So that now I have my chair at the right height, and then I set the table height so that my elbows or my forearms, when they come on the table, make a 90-degree angle with my upper arms. So that should be the table height. And then I can adjust the monitor height separately, and it should be at eye level. And I guess for the average height person, it should be okay. My understanding is that when you're very tall or very short, you could have issues, right? Sometimes people who are very tall, when they want to read, they can't get the workstation height up enough when they're standing. And when you're very short and sitting, the workstation might not come down enough so that your elbows make that 90-degree angle. But those things are important. And there are some injuries that we do see in radiologists related to the wrist when we use the keyboard and the mouse. And there is like wrist support that can help with that. So these are repetitive strain injuries, and there are three of them to know. There's carpal tunnel syndrome, cubital tunnel syndrome, which is for the ulnar nerve. The carpal tunnel would be involving the median nerve. And then there's also is it Dequervin
De Quervain, yeah,
yeah, say it,
tenosynovitis.
which is at the elbow, at the thumb. So those things are important to know about. And for me, the challenge is like I'm older now, and I do have a little bit of issues with my nerves there, but it's not impacting my work. But if I tell a younger person you must have this wrist support and do XYZ, it's hard to sell it because for years and years you just don't have any problems. And it's really difficult to understand this idea of repetitive injury, with the micro trauma every day, but over decades that you're in the job, it can actually do something. So I can only encourage people to use whenever they can, always sit the right way and at the workstation, use the wrist support, use any support they can get, ergonomic keyboards, all of that. What do you think?
I agree with everything you said, and probably haven't followed it to the best practice, but definitely something that's important to do early on in the career because these are real things that can happen.
Yeah. And then for many people, lumbar support in the chairs is also important. So there are other things to consider. Okay, coming back to technology, the workflow. There is a certain workflow in radiology. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a process that starts from the time that an order is placed to acquiring the images, following through to before that. You can take a step back. So you place an order for the image, it gets vetted, might get a protocol placed by a radiologist and get approved. Then you need to go get it scheduled. The patient can do that themselves sometimes or through central scheduling, arrives to the modality, acquires the images, and then the patient leaves. But then there's more stuff happening in the background. All of your PAC system, your RIS system, your electronic medical records, and modalities are all talking to each other at that point to move all the files around. You end up getting the RIS system again sits in the middle of all of this as the air traffic control, sending the information from the order so that it's ready on the CT or MRI scanner. So it's ready to go. It tells your PAC system to expect these images and sends it all that so that everyone's prepared, all the software is prepared to receive everything that it needs to happen. Those DICOM files can go to your archive where they can be viewed through your PACS or image viewer system. The radiologist will do their thing, interpret the image, provide a report, and sometimes incorporate or separate dictation software. And then that gets once it's marked as finalized, that whole report goes back downstream with HL7 messages to close out the case in the RIS, close it out in the EHR, post the report, and then close it out in your PAC system and remove it from your traditional work list. Those are all constantly talking to each other, and you're doing that thousands of times a day at certain places, maybe tens of thousands of times, and there's probably hundreds of thousands of messages exchanged throughout that whole process.
Thank you. And then there's the big D, the downtime, where everything stops working. And I know we have it rarely, but every institution experiences downtime at some point. And it means just that our electronic work environment is completely out, and we have to go back to managing everything in a different way. Can you talk little bit about downtime and what procedures we're using to manage a time of downtime?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about it as it's not an if, but a when it's going to happen. Some scheduled, some unscheduled downtime procedures. And there's two kind of main components to think about it as they're defined. So you have a disaster recovery process that has things like your offsite backup systems and what the frequency of it is and what's actually required to restore some of that data when there is a disruption. That's typically in an unexpected scenario, but it could be during planned downtimes as well. Separately, you have your business continuity policies that follow up when you're doing systematic precautions and backups, and then you have failover routines that you put in place when there is a system failure so that you can continue the patient care. If there's like a power outage or another catastrophic event that's happening, you have those types of policies to continue business as usual. Sometimes that means going to paper orders. Sometimes that means having written signed orders that are coming through. But it just depends on how you have it set up and what the details are and how widespread things are down.
Okay, great. How about these ransom attacks? Is that something that causes a downtime?
Yeah, it can. More frequently, cybersecurity is becoming a bigger and bigger deal and can take down healthcare systems in small or large scales. We're actually seeing more and more that even our third party groups, other vendors that we rely on, may have a ransomware attack happen. So, for processing insurance claims, for example, or one of their cloud servers that we don't control has a cybersecurity incident, and then it has downstream effects on one hospital system or multiple systems. This kind of falls under that same umbrella of having policies and procedures in place to take care of that because it can lead to unexpected downtimes that are prolonged.
And how about this term high availability systems that perform automated recovery? Do we have something like that in radiology?
Of course, yeah. So you'll have the fault tolerance for your systems. The radiology system is a core component of the healthcare enterprise, whether for emergency studies, inpatients, but it's critical to the entire hospitals and medical systems needs. Like you said, they're defined as high availability systems, and your core tier one software, your PACS, usually your dictation software, and your electronic medical record all are under the same boat and expected to have at least 99.99% uptime throughout a whole year, which means that you should have downtimes of those systems for less than an hour a year. Certainly, you might have more or less depending on your planned downtime for upgrades and other instances, but you want to build in that fault tolerance. So even if you have to take down your production environment, that you have a backup environment that you can go to and log into and continue with patient care. Same thing, you have your backend systems that are in place and connecting to that. If one data center goes down, your system automatically runs traffic to your backup data system. And a lot of times, your providers, patients, radiologists don't even notice that and happens all day, every day. It's when that redundancy kind of breaks apart, that's when the challenges come in. But
Oh.
having as much redundancy in place and a plan for it are the key components.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Let's take a break here. Please follow our next podcast with Elias Kilcano on IT stuff in radiology.